All right, so we're going to talk today about biodiversity. We've been talking about ecosystems and biomes and why things live where they do. Well, today we're going to talk about how many different things live in a certain area, and that is the diversity of an area. So the number of different species in an area is the biodiversity. That biodiversity is naturally affected by the local climate, the altitude, the topography. There are some biomes that are just better for life than other biomes. So like the Arctic tundra, very harsh conditions, very cold, not a lot of water. And so you don't get much diversity in the tundra compared to like, say, the Amazon rainforest. The rainforest biome has plenty of water, plenty of warm temperatures, and it really encourages life to live there. So it's funny when you look at the globe, you tend to get this latitudinal gradient. You get real rich diversity along the equator. And then as you fan out, as you get colder and less sunlight, it tends to kind of decrease in biodiversity. Most things like sunlight, warmth, and water. So the further you get from that, then the less biodiversity you get in an area. So when we look at how many species are in an area, it's important to wonder, like, how many species are there at all total? We still aren't sure. If you notice on this graph, the orange, the darker orange, represents how many total known species. And you notice most of them are insects, tons of different insect species, a big variety of insects. But we're thinking that even with us knowing almost 2 million different species, for anything from types of algae to plants to bacteria, we're still thinking we're only like 20% of the way to knowing how many species there are total. And most of them would be insects. We know close to 1,000 different species. We're estimating there's probably about 8,000 different species. Now, if you'll notice, the plant column and the vertebrate column, plants and vertebrates are almost all discovered, we think. That's because they're easy to find, they're big compared to bacteria, which are a lot harder to find and need specialized equipment. So if you want to name a species after yourself, go for like the mollusk or the bacteria there. So different types of diversity appear in different areas. You've got, of course, what we're talking about, the species diversity. That's how many different species occur in an area. But you can also get ecosystem diversity, which is how many different habitats occur within an ecosystem. So think like here in East Texas, we've got a deciduous forest ecosystem. But even within that, you've got lakes, you've got rivers, you've got lowlands that are more wet, you've got upper sandy ridges that are more dry, you've got areas with lots and lots of dense trees, you've got areas that have been cleared that are more open. So even within our East Texas deciduous forest ecosystem, you've got different habitats. And with different habitats, you can have lots of different species because you can have different conditions for them to grow in. And then within the species itself, we get genetic diversity. That's the different genes within members of a population. So within the squirrels that we have around here, the fox squirrels, you might have some that have thicker coats or thinner coats. You might have some that are bigger or smaller, some that get more fat in the winter or thin. And so each gene that they possess, each different trait that they have, would be advantageous for different conditions. So when those conditions of their habitat change, you are more likely to find some that survive with those changing conditions than if they were all a certain way. So our species richness is how many different species are in an area, but the relative abundance is the number of species in relation to each other. So for instance, our trees here on campus, we've got pine, 3 different types of pine trees. We've got oaks, we've got elms, multiple types of oaks, several types of elms, maple, but then relative abundance, we might have a whole lot of pine trees and not very many elm trees or maple trees. So that's your relative abundance, is how many in relation to each other. Now, it's important to have diversity in an ecosystem because all your species fulfill a certain niche. And think of a niche as like a job description. They have a certain thing that they eat, a certain place that they live, certain behaviors that they do. If they're taken out of the ecosystem, then it affects the food web and everything else. For instance, a squirrel, like we were talking about, a squirrel eats acorns. If there are no squirrels, then you have an overabundance of acorns, which causes competition with your new baby trees. If the squirrel is removed, then the thing that eats the squirrels, like the coyotes, they can't find the food that they want. So every species is dependent upon something else, at least one other something else, in a way that may or may not be obvious. We noticed with the longleaf pine, which grow a little bit south of here, when they started disappearing, suddenly the red-cockaded woodpecker was endangered. The red-cockaded woodpecker lives in the longleaf pine trees. So without the longleaf pine, the woodpecker could not find its home, and it suffered. It doesn't eat the longleaf pine. It's not always food web, but it could be habitat that's affected. Now, genetic diversity is also very important to an ecosystem. That increases the likelihood that some member of a population is going to survive the new conditions that an environment has. When you have a shrinking population, such as with our endangered species, when you get less and less members of that population, then you have less and less available traits to pass on to the next generation. It's almost like it's going through a bottleneck, like you can see in the picture here. Before the bottleneck, when we had plenty of species, then you had lots of different traits and adaptations, darker fur, lighter fur. Maybe with plants, some grew very tall to reach the sunlight, some were more short to be stable. But then once they were endangered, once they passed that bottleneck and there were only a few members of that population, even if we're able to reintroduce and increase the population, like with our captive breeding programs in zoos or by reclaiming the habitat, even if their numbers explode, they've still lost a lot of that diversity by not having as many members of the population to contribute those traits there. So they're more likely to inherit genetic diseases. They're more likely to have traits that don't allow them to survive when new conditions pop up. So why do we as humans care about ecosystem diversity? That's out there, that's in the woods. Who cares how many oaks and pines there are living on campus here? Well, with our ecosystems, they provide a lot of services to us. Could be medicine or industrial products, could be new varieties of crops that we eat. And then, of course, there's that ethical reason of we should be stewards of the earth and take care of it. And, of course, there's also money, ecotourism. People want to see a very diverse area, not the middle of a desert with one cactus, right? Even though that's pretty too. That's nice. When we look at all the services that the ecology provides to us, we have this system of ecosystem services, whether it's, you can see in the top right, provisioning, which is things that are provided to us, cultural, which is things that we get out of a diverse ecosystem, recreation, spiritual and religious values, mental and physical health. Then there's also supporting services, which keep the earth and the ecology running, so nutrient cycling, photosynthesis. Then there's regulating, things that keep the ecosystem in balance, climate regulation, disease and pest regulation, those things that keep our ecosystems functioning. So if we decrease in biodiversity, we decrease any number of these things. So we're going to stop here for just a second. And we're going to look next time at how our biodiversity has been changing and what we can do about that.